Today, we are looking at something that feels a bit like a perfect storm.
It really does.
And I don't use that term lightly just to hype things up. We are looking at this wild convergence of massive legal shifts, tectonic shifts, really a housing market behaving in ways we haven't seen since the 1980s, and legislative battles that could literally change the math of your bank account overnight.
Yeah, usually when we analyze retirement financial security, we tend to look at one silo. You might look at your investment strategy or maybe just dig into Social Security rules. But the source material we have today, this really comprehensive report on retirement financial security, it forces us to look at the whole board all at once.
Right, because it's all connected.
Exactly. We have the Supreme Court completely changing the rules of engagement for federal agencies. We've got the Federal Reserve stuck in a trap of its own making. And then just the stark reality of the grocery store aisle.
So the mission for this deep dive is to unpack this report without getting bogged down in all the academic jargon. We want to take you from the high-level legal stuff, which, trust me, is actually way more dramatic than it sounds, straight down to the nitty-gritty of managing a household budget in a high-inflation environment.
Because that's where it hits home.
Right, because the big question hanging over all this data is simply this. With the Social Security Administration having its power curbed and the housing market effectively frozen for the average buyer, how do you move from just surviving to actually living well?
Living well. That really is the key phrase here. The theme that jumps out at me the most from this report is autonomy. It is all about taking control back from systems, whether that is the government or the macroeconomy, that are just becoming increasingly unpredictable. The days of set it and forget it retirement planning are effectively over.
So let's jump right into the deep end. The report kicks off with what it calls a legal earthquake. Now, I know legal news usually puts people right to sleep, but this is about a Supreme Court ruling that fundamentally changes how the Social Security Administration or the SSA operates. It's huge. It's not just a minor policy tweak. We are talking about the end of an era for administrative power.
Yeah, to understand why this is such an earthquake, you have to understand the old way of doing things. The doctrine that ruled the land for decades was basically that if a law was ambiguous, the courts would just defer to the agency's interpretation of that law.
Meaning the SSA was basically an island.
Exactly. They operated with absolute administrative authority. They were, in effect, the judge, the jury, and the executioner.
So to make this concrete for you listening at home, if the SSA sent you a letter saying, hey, we calculated your benefits this way based on this really obscure internal rule, and you said, wait, I think that is wrong, they were the ones who decided if they were wrong.
That is exactly the crux of it. If they sent a conflicting letter or changed a calculation based on some opaque internal memo, the beneficiary, you, the retiree, you were often stuck in this endless bureaucratic loop. You would be on the hotline for hours arguing with the agency about the agency's own interpretation of the agency's rules.
Which is a nightmare.
Right. And if you sued, the courts would generally just say, well, they are the experts. We trust their reading of the statute.
That sounds incredibly frustrating, especially if you're just on the receiving end of a clerical error. But the report says this new legal reality completely constrains that authority. The SSA can no longer unilaterally change how things like cost of living adjustments, the CLAs, are calculated without accountability.
Right. They can't just reclassify beneficiaries based on a whim or a hidden interpretation anymore.
So why does that matter for the average person? Is this a win for the little guy?
It is a massive win. Right. It keeps the goalposts fixed. It forces transparency because now, if the SSA is challenged, a judge actually looks at the law from scratch without just automatically trusting the agency. It creates a level playing field where the rules cannot just be changed arbitrarily without real court oversight.
Okay, so the courts are keeping the SSA in check. That is the legal side, and it's good news for keeping things fair. But let's talk about the money, because there is a lot of buzz in this report about new financial support for seniors.
Oh, absolutely. This is where the politics violently collides with the economics.
And real quick, before we get into the details of these proposals, I just want to remind you listening, whenever our sources dive into politically charged territory like this, from the left or the right, we are not taking sides. We aren't endorsing any of these viewpoints. We are just here to impartially report on what is in the source material so you have the facts.
A very important disclaimer. Because the reality is, seniors are the demographic with the highest voter turnout, and they're also the group being hit the absolute hardest by inflation. So politicians on all sides are under immense pressure to deliver something tangible right now.
Right, and the report details a few scenarios currently being debated in Congress. We are seeing proposals for payments ranging from $400, sort of like that fourth stimulus check we saw a while back, all the way up to $2,000.
And the debate isn't just about the dollar amount, it's about the structure. Will this be a one-time lump sum payment, or will it be a recurring monthly payment? The eligibility seems targeted mostly at low-income SSA recipients, so they're likely looking at income caps around $1,800 to $2,000 a month.
Okay, I have to stop you there because this is where the report gets really intense. If the government offers you a $2,000 check, your instinct is obviously to say thank you and put it in the bank. But you flag something in the data called the Trojan Horse warning.
Yes, and this is probably the most crucial insight in the entire deep dive today, especially regarding lump sum payments.
What is the danger? A sudden influx of cash sounds like a good thing.
It sounds like a lifeline, but it can actually be a trap. If you get a sudden influx of cash, say a $2,000 lump sum, it can temporarily push your overall assets above the strict threshold for needs-based programs. We are talking about critical programs like Medicaid and SNAP, which is food stamps.
Wait, so getting the check could disqualify you from other benefits?
Exactly. You could get the $2,000 check in the mail, but completely lose your health coverage or your food assistance.
That is staggering.
It is. The asset limits for some of these welfare programs are incredibly low, and if your bank account suddenly spikes because of a government relief check, the system flags you as having too many assets. You lose the recurring support you rely on for a one-time payout.
So what is the strategy there? You can't just reject the money, but you can't just deposit it and hope for the best either.
No, absolutely. Do not just deposit it and hope for the best. The report strongly advises that if you are on any needs-based programs, you must consult welfare experts to shield your existing benefits before accepting or banking the aid. You have to be incredibly strategic.
Wow. Okay, so we've looked at the legal landscape and the political traps. Let's pull back and look at the macro view. The housing market, the Fed, the big picture. The report cites the affordability index, and it paints a pretty bleak picture.
It really does. To give you some context, back in 2013, the affordability index was over 200.
And where is it now?
It is hovering right around 100.
Which means what, exactly, for the average family?
It means an average family effectively cannot buy an average home today. The market is completely frozen for normal buyers.
And this creates a huge ripple effect for retirement security, right?
Absolutely. Think about seniors who want to downsize. You can't sell your current home and buy a smaller one because the interest rates and prices on the new, smaller home will make your monthly payment higher than what you are paying now. You are trapped in your current house.
Well, what is the Federal Reserve doing about this? We know there's a leadership change coming, with Kevin Warsh expected to step in around May. Are they trying to fix it?
They are trying to pull levers, but the levers aren't really connected to the gears anymore. The report notes that recently, on January 8th, the government actually directed Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to buy $200 billion in mortgage bonds. The idea was to try and lower interest rates.
$200 billion sounds like a massive amount of money to throw at a problem.
It sounds massive until you realize that the mortgage market is a $12 trillion market. Right, so $200 billion is a drop in the bucket. It is not nearly enough to create a breakthrough change in affordability.
So housing is stuck. And then the report brings up another macro issue on the SSA Cliff. This sounds ominous.
It is the ultimate math problem. The Medicare and SocialSecurity Trustees report predicts a major funding shortfall. If Congress does not act, we're looking at an automatic 23% cut in benefits by the year 2033.
A 23% cut. That is a quarter of your income just vanishing. And this puts the government in a terrible political bind, doesn't it? Especially when you tie it back to housing.
Exactly. The government has a massive conflict of interest here. On one hand, they desperately want affordable housing. But on the other hand, if home prices actually drop the 20 to 30% needed to make them affordable again, voters get furious because they lose their equity.
Right. Nobody wants their house to be worth less.
And worse for the government, if home values drop, property tax revenue plummets. When tax revenue plummets, the national debt gets much, much worse. They are completely boxed in.
So the macroeconomics are incredibly heavy. The government is stuck, the Fed is throwing pebbles into the ocean, and the SSA is facing a cliff. This is why the report pivots so hard into personal strategies, isn't it? Because you have to take control yourself.
That is exactly the pivot. You cannot wait for the macro environment to save you. Which brings us to the tactical survival section of the report, the 5 habits.
Let's get into these because this is the empowering part. This is how you move from surviving to living well. To set the context, the report references the fact that the COA increase in March 2025 was only 2.5%. And anyone buying groceries knows that does not cover real food and drug inflation.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Which is why habit 1 is so critical. They call it the business meeting.
I love this concept. Treat your finances like a corporation.
Precisely. On the exact day your direct deposit hits, you need to sit down and have a formal meeting with yourself. You give every single dollar a name and a job. You cannot afford to let money just disappear into vague spending categories anymore. You have to be the CEO of your household.
It's intentionality. And that leads right into habit 2, killing legacy expenses.
The zombie audit.
The zombie audit, yes. The report says you need to aggressively audit your bank statements for zombie subscriptions, streaming services you don't watch, magazines, gym memberships you haven't used in a year.
It sounds basic, but the report notes that cutting these out can easily free up $200 to $400 a month for the average household. In a high inflation environment, finding $400 extra a month is huge.
That is way more than the 2.5% COLA increase for most people.
Exactly.
So habit 3 is smart substitution. And the key phrase here is be active, not passive.
Right. You cannot just set and forget your bills. For example, you have to actively shop your Medicare supplement every single open enrollment period. Do not just let it auto-renew.
The report also mentions calling your internet and phone providers to demand loyalty rates or senior drug counts, right?
Yes. If you have been with a company for years, you are almost certainly overpaying. You have to pick up the phone, tell them you are leaving, and force them to give you the retention rate. It is active combat for your budget.
Active combat, I like that. Now, habit 4 is one we all know is important, but framing it as a financial strategy is really interesting. Health as wealth.
Because medical costs are the single biggest threat to a retirement budget, period.
So how do you manage that?
By utilizing absolutely every piece of free preventative care offered by Medicare, screenings, vaccines, wellness visits. You have to view staying healthy not just as a lifestyle choice, but as a core financial strategy to keep money in your pocket and avoid catastrophic medical debt.
Prevention is cheaper than the cure.
Always.
And finally, habit 5, the 48-hour rule. This is all about delaying gratification.
Right. When you see something non-essential that you want to buy, you force yourself to wait exactly 2 days before purchasing it.
Does waiting 2 days really make a difference?
It breaks the emotional impulse. Most of the time, after 48 hours, the urge to buy has passed. The report explains that doing this consistently builds what they call financial margin. That is the safety zone between your income and your expenses. And when you choose to delay, you don't feel deprived, you feel in control.
It builds that autonomy you were talking about earlier. Okay, so those are the 5 habits. As we wrap up, the report outlines a roadmap to autonomy. It's a quick checklist of immediate things you need to do. First on the list, log into SSA.gov to check your income history for errors.
You have to do this. Remember the legal earthquake we discussed? The SSA makes data entry errors. If your income history is wrong, your future benefits will be wrong. Check it now while you have the energy to fix it.
Next on the checklist, sign up for local congressional newsletters.
This is how you track those Social Security bills and those $2,000 relief proposals. You need to know what is coming down the pipeline before it hits the news so you can prepare your strategy.
And the third item on the roadmap is family transparency. Having the really hard talks about money with your relatives before a crisis hits.
It is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. If you wait until an emergency room visit to discuss financial limits and account access, it is too late.
The report caps this all off by reminding us of the 3-legged stool of retirement. Social Security is just one leg. The other 2 are personal savings and pensions, and those must be reinforced.
Right, because the Social Security leg is getting wobbly. The tip the report gives is to move any small surpluses, like the money you saved from killing those zombie subscriptions, directly into a high-yield savings account specifically earmarked for medical emergencies.
Build your own safety net. So let's recap this whole journey. We started with the Supreme Court completely changing the rules, meaning the SSA is finally being watched by the courts and can't just act as judge and jury. We looked at the extreme volatility of the economy, the frozen housing market, and how the government is basically paralyzed by its own debt and tax needs.
And we looked at the danger of lump sum stimulus checks and how you have to protect your asset limits.
Right. And all of this heavy macro stuff brings us back to the core philosophy of this report, which is
the government is not your retirement plan.
That is a tough pill to swallow.
It is, but it's also reality. True security comes from your own discipline, your awareness, and your agility.
Which brings us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with today. We always like to end with something for you to mull over.
And based on this report, the question you need to ask yourself is this. If the financial margin you build is the only thing protecting you from the absolute chaos of the macroeconomy, are you treating your personal budget with the exact same seriousness that a CEO treats a company balance sheet?
Are you the CEO of your own life, or are you just an employee of your habits? That is a great question to leave on. Thank you so much for breaking all this down, and thank you all for diving deep with us today. Remember to stay curious, stay informed, and we will see you on the next deep dive.